Language and the brain. Language plays a central role in the human brain. Neurolinguistic is the study of how language is represented in the brain. That is, how and where our brains store our knowledge of the language or languages that we speak, understand, read, and write. What happens in our brains as we acquire that knowledge and what happens as we use it in our everyday lives. Here is the situation. The point of this amazing tale is that while language may be located in the brain, it clearly is not situated right at the front. There is a man that is known to have survived severe damage to the brain. A 25-year-old man is waiting outside his workplace and unfortunately he was hit by a car. He suffered the type of injury from which it was assumed no one could recover. However, a month later, he was up and about with no apparent damage to his senses or his speech. He was injured through the front part of his brain but his language abilities were unaffected. Language areas in the brain. Our language abilities are enabled by a coordinated network of brain regions that have evolved to give human a sophisticated ability to communicate. The term language center refers to the areas of the brain which serve a particular function for speech processing and production. There are several areas of the brain that play a critical role in speech and language. Broca's area involved in production of speech sounds. Wernicke's area involved in understanding of speech. Motor cortex controls the movement of muscles. Arcuate fasciculus connects Wernicke's area to Broca's area. Broca's area, located in the left hemisphere, is associated with speech production and articulation. Our ability to articulate ideas as well as use words accurately in spoken and written language has been attributed to this crucial area. Wernicke's area is a critical language area in the posterior superior temporal lobe connects to Broca's area via a neural pathway. Wernicke's area is primarily involved in the comprehension. Historically, this area has been associated with language processing, whether it is written or spoken. The motor cortex is the region of the cerebral cortex involved in the planning, control, and execution of voluntary movements. Classically, the motor cortex is an area of the frontal lobe located in the posterior presental gyrus, immediately anterior to the central sulcus. The arcuate fasciculus, Latin curve bundle, is a bundle of axons that connects Broca's area and Wernicke's area in the brain. It is an association fiber tract connecting caudal temporal cortex and inferior frontal lobe. Localization view is a specific aspect of language ability can be accorded specific locations in the brain. Example: to suggest the brain activity involved in hearing word, understanding it, then saying it would follow a definite pattern.
The next topic is tongue tips and slips. Under this, we have the tip of the tongue phenomenon. It is the phenomenon that when we have the word in our mind but we cannot utter it. This experience also mainly occurs with uncommon words and names. The next one is malapropism. Malapropism is the unintentional misuse of a word that has strong phonological similarities to the target word you're trying to produce. The word malapropism comes from Mrs. Malaprop, a character in the Sheridan's comedy The Rivals. Let's look at this example. The speaker used incorrect word in a place of a word with a similar sound producing nonsensical and sometimes humorous utterance. Apprehend with reprehend. The next one is slips of the tongue. It is another type of speech error. Under this is Spoonerisms that is called after William Spooner, an Anglican clergyman at Oxford University. It is the result of sound being carried over from one word to the next. It is the interchange of two initial sounds. For example, block boxes for block boxes, Roman numeral for Roman numeral, top of tea for the cup of tea. The next one is slips of the ear. It is another type of slip that provides some clues on how the brain tries to make sense of the auditory signal. We have an example situation here. As you can see, in an office, there is a man who asked the girl if she saw the great ape, but the girl heard that he is looking for a great ape, which is odd to hear on that context. And this is the example of the slips of the ear.
Aphasia is a language disorder. This happens after a stroke or a head injuries. It can affect any aspect of language, your comprehension, product of your speech, reading and writing, and all has to do with the language. Those people suffer from different types of language disorders, generally described as aphasia. Broca's aphasia, also called as motor aphasia, described as non-fluent, consists of lexical morphemes and omission of functional morphemes. Let's say for example, Wernicke's aphasia, also called as sensory aphasia, and fluent. Example, I can talk all of the things I do, and part I can go right, but I can tell from the other people. Anomia. To overcome their word-finding difficulties, speakers use different strategies such as trying to describe objects or talking about their purpose. So here is an example speech of a person who has a conduction aphasia. So as you can see, it's more hard to understand and has repetition of words and indirect meanings. Conduction aphasia. Much less common type of aphasia has been associated with damage to arcuate, fasciculus, and is called conduction aphasia. For example, Basse and Posh, or base and wash. It came from brain disease, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease.
Dichotic listening, an experimental technique that has demonstrated a left hemisphere dominance for syllable and word processing, is called dichotic listening test. It is an experimental technique that established the fact that anything experienced on the right side of the body is being processed in the left side of the brain, and anything on the left side is processed in the right hemisphere of the brain. Flaherty's 2004. Flaherty's 2004, the basic assumption would be that a signal coming in the right ear will go to the left hemisphere, and the signal coming in the left ear will go to the right hemisphere. Because of this information, they tried to prove it. They did an experiment where they gave earphones to a person, but it produced different. As you can see on the illustration, the word dog was first processed in the right hemisphere and proceeded to the left, where we call the language center of the brain. The word dog is played on the left ear, as you can see, and the word cat is played on the right ear, and it will be processed in the left hemisphere. So this is what the dichotic listening test do and explains.
Critical period. The apparent lateralization of the left hemisphere for language is usually described in terms of lateral dominance or lateralization. Since the human child does not emerge from the womb as a fully articulate language user, it is generally thought that the language lateralization process begins in early childhood. It coincides with the period during which language acquisition takes place, during childhood. There is a period when the human brain is most ready to receive input and learn in a particular language. This is sometimes called the sensitive period for language acquisition, but is more generally known as the critical period. Though some think it may start earlier, the general view is that the critical period for first language acquisition lasts from birth until puberty. And if a child does not acquire language during this period, for any one of number of reasons, then he or she will find it almost impossible to learn language later on. In one unfortunate but well-documented case, we have gained some insight to what happens when the critical period passes without adequate linguistic input.
Jenny. Jenny is a feral child, a child who has lived in isolation starting at the very young age and thereby has remained unaware of human behavior and language. She is unable to chew, barely able to swallow, unable to focus her eyes beyond 12 feet, unable to cry, could not fully extend her arms or legs, could not tell the difference between hot and cold, spoke very little, stop it, and no more.